There are going to be differences, and these differences are what lead to disagreements. Imagine a scenario where you and your friends are booking an Airbnb for an upcoming trip. The group isn't progressing, and you can tell by the tone people are getting frustrated. Half of the group wants a cheap option, while the other half wants a nice place close to the city center. This kind of situation happens all of the time. And if you zoom out, you can probably understand both perspectives. Someone might be trying to pay off their credit card debt or student loans, or maybe saving for an upcoming wedding, but wants to go on the trip if it can fit within their budget. Another person might be buried in work, and this is one of the few weeks they've gotten to take off and enjoy. Spending a couple extra $100 is worth it to them if it means the weekend turns from a good time to an unforgettable trip with their friends. At the end of the day, both people want to spend time with their friends, but there is conflict because they have other goals that need to fit within their plans. This is messy. Layer on the fact that people make different amounts of money and that upbringing makes us value money differently. You can see why these aren't always straightforward decisions. It's not just friends either. These kind of situations happen with our partners, family members, roommates, and more. So how do we discuss money with these important people in our lives? And how do we stand up for ourselves whenever we are being asked to do something that we don't want to do? Well, that's why I interviewed Allie Volpe. Allie is a senior reporter at Fox and recently covered a story on how to fight without ruining a relationship. The headline immediately caught my attention as I think this is a topic that isn't discussed enough in personal finance. If you're pursuing financial independence, you're probably aggressively saving, or at least very aware of how you're spending your money. There are moments when you'll have to make a decision and have an awkward conversation about money with someone close to you. Allie is going to be sharing language that you can use during these situations, mistakes to avoid, and what to do whenever you just can't see eye to eye. So if that's something that you've been looking for, let's get into it. I hope you enjoy my conversation with the friendship and connection enthusiast, Allie Volpe. You know those moments where you think, I wish I would have learned this in school? Those are the topics that we love to talk about. Join me each week as I interview experts sharing their strategies for solving problems that us young adults will face throughout our 20s and 30s. So what are you waiting for? If you want new episodes about adulting advice every Monday, hit that follow button. Allie, let's jump into today's conversation. You are a writer and you wrote this article around how to fight without ruining a relationship. And I read it. I don't remember where I found it. I think maybe through a newsletter that I was following. And I just thought it was such a great approach and probably a really timely topic for a podcast like this because there are a lot of arguments when it comes to money. And sometimes, most of the time, I feel like they're hard to actually control or think through how to best approach them. And at the end of the day, like, we're gonna fight. Like, nobody's perfect. And on the flip side, you also can't just avoid arguments or disagreements because being extremely conflict averse is also not very helpful too and will lead to resentment. So I want to use your article and your knowledge and what you've kind of gained through writing that article to get to a place where we can have healthy disagreements with people in our life. So why don't we start out with just some of the obvious, which is like, what mistakes do people make in an argument? Are there some common things that you've seen, that you've done, that you learned about through writing this article?
Yeah, I mean, truly been there, made all the mistakes because, like, I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But, like, one of the biggest mistakes that people make, John and Julie Gottman told me, they're, the preeminent relationship expert, is fighting to win. So, like, you're not listening to the other person when you're fighting to win. You're, like, not wanting to compromise. Like, you're kind of coming to battle because you're trying to prove the other person wrong. You'll do whatever it takes to win. You're trying to persuade them to see your side when ultimately, like, an argument is a compromise, like, or it should be a compromise. Like, both people should feel like they got something from it, which I think is a really smart way to look at an argument because it's not a battle. Like, you should preserve your relationship with people. And another big mistake that people make is, like, going on the offensive and, like, attacking people for their beliefs, which isn't helpful because people just shut down then if you're, like, telling them they're wrong about something. Because again, like, we shouldn't feel like we're conceding everything, but it should feel like, okay, this is a nice, happy medium where, like, we've met in the middle. Like, you don't want to dismiss their problems as like not a problem at all. Like, if a friend is like, oh, this is out of my budget, like I can't go on this vacation, to dismiss them and to say like, don't worry about it. Like, it's not a lot of money. Like, that doesn't work. And that's just going to make your friend feel really, really terrible. Interrupting people is a huge mistake that people make. Like, you just cut them off in the middle of what they're saying. Playing the victim, like, that's also a huge mistake. Like, again, maybe you're the friend where you're like, no, I can't go on that vacation. It's too expensive because, like, I can't help it that you have such a great job and I have such a terrible job and the world is really hard for me. Like, all of those things may be true, and it definitely is true for a lot of people. But it isn't helpful to sort of use that as an argument, because the person on the other side, like, yeah, while they might feel for you, it doesn't help you get to that happy medium. And then when you just shut down, that's not really helpful at all either, because we're not getting anywhere. If you're just like, no, I can't hear this, I can't talk about this, like, you're not moving towards a solution.
Yeah, I probably should have laid some context that we're looking at this approach and these skills from the context of like a relationship with someone you care about. This could be your significant other. This could be a friend. This could be a family member. Okay, if somebody just attacks you on the sidewalk and you start levying and interrupting them and whatever, cool. That maybe this conversation will help with that. But like, we're truly talking about a relationship that you care about to some extent. How do you have healthy disagreements with them? And I think you hit on a lot of good ones. And I think the big one that you started with there is really fighting to win. Like, I think it's easier to see yourself dismissing or interrupting people or blaming other people or even playing the victim. But fighting to win, I think, is a little bit more harder to understand when you're doing it. It's almost like you're not necessarily listening to them. Like, you're listening to respond and to counter their argument, not really listening to try to hear them and understand them.
And like, that's something that experts told me is like a huge problem people have. Like, while the other person is talking, we're thinking about the next thing we're going to say rather than listening to them. And like, that's not helpful at all, because everyone wants to feel like they're heard and, you know, that their problems are being validated. But yeah, when we're going in to win, like, we're just thinking about like the next persuasive thing that we want to say. And that's not really helpful at all.
Definitely. So you mentioned in your article that just with a little bit of conversational fine tuning, you can transform an often frustrating experience into a fruitful one. So let's start to dive into a couple of these areas that we can spend some time on, this conversational fine tuning, to actually have fruitful and healthy disagreements. And the first thing that you mentioned is to understand what you're really arguing about, which this one hit me pretty hard because I recently did it, and I can share a personal story here in a second. But what did you mean by that? Like, what did you mean by really understanding what you're arguing about? Can you expand on that and maybe share an example?
Oftentimes when there is an argument, there's usually like the underlying meaning. Like, for an example that I gave in the article is like, maybe you're fighting with your partner over like wanting to get the bathroom renovation finished. You're like, it's taking too long, it's taking too much money, like it needs to be done. But like, what is the true meaning underneath that argument? Maybe it's that like your partner is feeling like, I am not having enough say in this bathroom renovation. Like, this is all about you and your space. And I feel like I'm the outsider here and I don't have any input. That goes to like a mismatch in the relationship. So like, that's very different than the back room. So often there's like something deeper at play, even with like, I don't know, a coworker maybe. Like, okay, this coworker is like taking credit for my work. I mean, that is pretty like blatant, like what the issue is, but like ultimately it comes down to like, I don't feel valued at work. Often there's like the initial argument, but like, what is like the deeper feeling or the deeper like need you feel like is not being met? And I think like we don't often consider what that might be, because it's very easy to be like, oh, well, like you leave your shoes by the door, I'm so pissed about this, when really it's, I'm mad that I feel like you don't respect our space.
That makes total sense. And I was prepping for this conversation this weekend, and I just happened to be in a disagreement or an argument with my girlfriend at the time. And what happened was, on Saturday, I was planning a date day for her, like a day of just random mini adventures. And I let her know that and she agreed to it. But I really didn't give her a time frame. Like I didn't say like, hey, we're gonna start here and end there. Fairly, like she probably assumed like, hey, we're gonna start in early afternoon and probably hang out most of the evening. And she made plans with a friend to go to a run club in the morning on Saturday. And she told me, she invited me and she was like, do you want to go? And I was like, okay, like what? I thought we were hanging out on Saturday. She's like, oh, well, I didn't know when we were starting. And I kind of got upset about that. And at the end of the day, it wasn't the fact that she made early plans or even that like those plans didn't fit into my plans because I honestly hadn't organized the day yet. The true underlying reasoning that I was upset was she'd just been traveling for 6 weeks. And I felt like I hadn't had any of her attention over the last couple of months. And I was really craving her attention. But I didn't come out and say that until I recognized what the real underlying issue of this argument was. She kept thinking, oh, I disrupted his plan that he had in place. I need to figure out a solution to move my run date with my friends. But at the end of the day, it was really just like, I wanted your undivided attention for an entire day. And whenever I was like actually honest and frank with her about this, it totally made sense. And at the end of the day, her and I actually went to this run club with her friend. We had an amazing time. It was so fun. She felt great after working out too, which just led to like this rush of energy that we got to utilize the rest of the day. And we had like this amazing one-on-one time, like the entire rest of the day. So like I just put it out there. She understood it. She recognized it. She knew she'd been traveling a lot for work and that had been hard on me. She acknowledged that. And then she gave me her full undivided attention for an entire day. And now my cup is full.
Yeah, you both got what you wanted. I'm like, my question for you is like, do you feel like the argument or the outcome would have been different if you hadn't been open of like, well, I just want your undivided attention. Like I'm feeling not enough attention is being paid to me.
Yeah, I was almost just slipping into dismissive mode where it's just like, whatever, just like we won't do anything Saturday, just go have fun with your friends kind of thing. And that definitely would have put a divide. But like there was just like a really obvious, easy compromise whenever it's like all said and done. And she's like, just come with me and then we'll hang out the rest of the day. And I was just like, okay, that makes sense. I'm cool with that. So yeah, I think once I really put it out there and felt heard and she really recognized me in that extent, like it definitely calmed me down and I just got level-headed again. I'm like, that's not fair for me to hold her hostage for an entire day. All she was asking for was 8 to 9 o'clock to go to a run club with a friend and even extended the invitation to me. So I thought that was totally fair.
Yeah, see, it's a compromise. Like it's not like you won or she won. Like everyone got what they wanted out of it and no one was mad, it sounds like.
Yes. So what are a couple, like you mentioned a few questions that you can ask another person to really uncover or understand what they're truly arguing about? Do you remember a couple of those that you wrote down and can you share them if so?
The Gottmans, again, they call this the dreams within the conflict. Like, what is the dream behind why someone is mad? And some of the questions that they suggested to me were, tell me why this is so important to you. Or is there a story behind this for you? So that gets the other person talking about like what is deeper beneath the surface here. And again, like, because it might be hard for someone to, like you did, realize it and come right out and say it. So this is sort of like pulling that out of the other person to find out like what it actually is that they're upset about. And like, again, when it comes to like money fights with friends, like that question of like, tell me why this is so important to you, or is there a story behind this for you, is so helpful because like everything comes back to like how we grew up, you know, and like the stories we have around money are so tied to our past experiences. And so I think to ask somebody that, like, again, to go back to that example of like, oh, this vacation's too expensive, I can't do that. But, and then the other person's like, oh, well, you make good money. Like, I think you could totally afford it. But instead of saying like, well, why, you might be thinking that, but you could say like, why is that so important to you? You might realize like, oh yeah, like growing up, I always saved my money because like my parents always told me to work and I needed to have my own money to pay for things because we didn't have a lot of money growing up. And so that can totally explain why someone like might not value splurging on a vacation or a dinner, or whatever it might be. So just like asking those questions really gets to the heart of like where you actually disagree.
Yeah, and more times than not, like we have money that we can spend on things. There are very few things that we don't have the money to actually buy. And especially for a lot of people that listen to this podcast, they're sometimes hyper frugal. They're definitely savers and investors. So like they're putting money away. So they're not struggling in a sense of a paycheck to paycheck cycle. The money's there, and they often do get the question on like, hey, you can afford this. But if you're really digging into some of the why or asking some of those things, why this is important to you, it might just be like, it's important for me to save that $2,000 and not go on this trip because I'm trying to save for a down payment on my home, or I'm trying to reach financial independence, or I am working really, really hard to pay off my student loans. Even a follow-up question on that, if you used your second question that you mentioned there, which is there a story behind this for you? Maybe there is. Maybe there's a story from childhood, or like, hey, we were always in debt and I saw my parents struggling to pay off their mortgage and their student loans and their car payment and their credit card debt time after time. And I really just don't want to live in that anxiety or money fear in the same kind of way. So it is important for me right now to be paying off student loans and getting that off my plate. Although I could probably afford this trip right now.
Totally. And like I find that like my partner and I often are having those sort of conversations, especially about money, because like our relationships with money are totally different. And like it comes down to like our parents and how we were raised. And so like he's always the person, he's like, well, you can afford it. Like, why are you being weird about this? And I always have to tell him like my relationship to money is different than yours. Like I was always very much a saver because like who knows what could happen, because like I know my parents aren't in a position to help me if an emergency were to happen, and like I own my house and my car. And so like knowing all of these things, like I like to be a little bit more conservative. And he is very much of the mind of like, well, I'm going to die someday and I can't take that money with me. And so we always have to like, come to a compromise, because like the way we inherently see money is different. Not to say one is better than the other, but it's helpful to know where the other person is coming from.
It's so true. It's so true. And I see that kind of dynamic in relationship play over and over and over again, especially like the saver and the spender mentality. I mean, it's very generalization, but I do think it's a typical compatible relationship. But it's nice that you guys can both find ways to express that in different ways. Like maybe for you, it's like, yes, my paycheck comes in and I want to make sure I set aside the money for these certain things. And then everything excess of that, I'd love to dedicate towards spending on something in the here and the now. And the reverse kind of works for somebody that is used to spending and very comfortable spending on the here and now. Because once again, YOLO, we're all going to die one day and we can't take the money with us. And that is also a very, very valid mindset to have, because truly, like I've seen many people pass away with millions of dollars. And, if they look back on their life, they probably would have let off the gas a little bit and maybe enjoyed things a little bit more.
Yeah, so I'm trying to like figure out where I fit, like to come a little bit closer to his side and to YOLO a little bit more, but also, be conservative, because I would like to retire.
You also mentioned in the article that people typically want one of three things whenever it comes to an argument. They either want to make a point, they want to make a difference, or they want to be heard. And I want to focus the conversation on that last piece there, to be heard, because I do feel like this comes up very often. And especially I'm in my own personal relationship, I see this where like I don't realize whenever my girlfriend comes to me that she's just trying to be heard and we're not trying to solve something, or vice versa. What are some ways that you can listen and make someone feel heard? Like, are there some things that we can actively be doing in that regard?
It is often helpful to ask someone like, do you want my advice, or do you just want to vent, like right off the bat? Because then at least like what the deal is there. And like my good friend always asks me that. She's like, well, do you want my advice? And like, it's such a thoughtful thing to do, because then I can be like, yeah, sure. Or say like, no, I just want to vent, because you just want to be heard. But when you are on the receiving end of maybe a vent, don't just wait to talk, like breathe, actually listen. Sometimes taking notes helps, which could be kind of awkward in like an interpersonal situation, but it helps you like remember what they're actually saying. Like, as a reporter, I am always taking notes during conversations, even as I'm recording it, because it helps me remember, and I can ask follow-up questions because I have what they said right in front of me. And then Another helpful tip is to repeat back to the other person what you think you heard so everyone can be on the same page. Some like helpful things to say are like, so what I think I'm hearing is you're upset because we aren't spending enough time together. Or let me see if I heard that correctly. Here's what I think you just said, which kind of can seem awkward, but I think just like letting the other person know like you're listening. And if you like did get something wrong, then they can correct you. Be like, no, it's not that like I want like, or like I want you to spend your entire day with me. It's just like we have these plans. I feel like we're disregarding these plans. So it can help people like get on the same page, because a lot of times I feel like people are fighting. They are not fighting about the same thing. Like what one person is saying is like, oh, I think you're disregarding our plans. And the other person is like, I want to spend the entire day with you. And like, they're two different things.
Man, I feel personally attacked in that example.
Well, no, you did it right. You got like on the same page. You like expressed why you were feeling a certain kind of way. So it wasn't like you guys are both like fighting about two different things.
Yeah. I love the callback method. I mean, as a podcaster too, we get trained to do this very often. A, for the sake of like this conversation, but B, for the sake of the audience too, to make sure they heard what the speaker said. I could see this playing out and being very helpful. I definitely feel like it helps in terms of being heard, but sometimes it does give somebody an opportunity to clarify a point that they made. So in a situation, it might be like maybe a friend invites you out for dinner and there's a misunderstanding and they feel like you don't want to hang out with them. And you call it back, maybe they call it back to you and they say, so what I'm hearing is like, you don't really want to spend time with me, or you don't really want to go to dinner with me. And you might get an opportunity to clarify that point. And it's like, it's not that I don't want to spend time with you, or it's not that I really don't want to go to dinner with you. It's just that I can't spend money right now because I have other priorities. Is there an opportunity for us to hang out that doesn't require us to spend money? And then that's how you get closer to a compromise.
And that's like not a hard thing to say. Like no friend on the other side is going to get mad at you for saying that. And if they do, then they're probably, not the best friend. Or you can ask them questions again, like, why is it so important to you that we do this thing that costs money? And then maybe it's like, well, this is my birthday dinner and I really wanted you there. And so then you can move on from there. But again, it's like really actually just finding out like what the other person really wants and like asking them questions to get there, again, which I feel like we're not very good at doing when we're like in the heat of an argument. Like we're not trying to like ask other person questions because again, we're just trying to like get out our thoughts as quickly as possible. But if we just like slow down and ask like, why is this important to you? Or like, yeah, that is hard. Like, why do you feel that way? We could like much more quickly get to the like true heart of the matter.
Yeah, I agree. And this might go hand in hand with the next point, but you also shared this piece of advice to focus on areas of agreement and negotiate where you don't agree. So maybe starting with the first one too, focusing on areas of agreement. What are some ways or how does this really show up in a disagreement?
Yeah, because like you might think you're arguing about like two totally different things, but it really, there's more in common than you think. So a tip that one of the experts gave me is like, saying like that point you made about like not wanting to go over budget is so important. I'm so glad you said that because that puts you on like an equal playing field. And like this is especially helpful in work or like even if you're, again, like to go back to the trip analogy, like you have a shared goal now. The goal is to not go over budget. So like find, like they could be saying a million things that you don't agree with, but like find that one thing that you agree with. And that's like the white flag, because then now they know we're not trying to butt heads here. Like we're all on the same side. We're trying to come to a solution together. So like even if they're just saying like a bunch of stuff that you're like, no, this is stupid, I hate this, like find the one thing, because then that sets you off on like the right foot.
Yeah, it's almost like jarring. It almost stops you like mid disagreement. And you're like, oh, geez, actually, I do agree with that. And often whenever I see this play out, the other person agrees to agree and then shares another thing that they also agree on. And like you just see the anger and the emotions kind of dissipate from that. And yeah, there is this now change of course in the conversation. So I think it's a really, really powerful exercise to be like, wow, we are disagreeing so much right now. What do we agree on? And start sharing some of those things.
Yeah, and it just shows like you respect the other person because again, you're not like going like, well, that point's stupid, that's dumb, that's never gonna work. It's like, no, our goal is to not go over budget. That's what we want to do. So how can we get to that point where like everybody feels like they're comfortable spending whatever it is that we have to spend?
Yeah, and then just inevitably, there are going to be things that you disagree on, but both people don't necessarily have the same points that they want to negotiate for. There are situations where you might need something, the other person might need something, and you're both very comfortable compromising on both of those things. It just takes a little creativity. Can you walk us through the bagel exercise and how that might play out in a disagreement?
Yes, I love this. Like, again, not taking personal credit for this. This comes from the Gottmans. Again, they are geniuses. But like when it just feels like your point of view and the other person's point of view are so opposed, like we're never going to compromise here, they suggest this bagel method. So like you draw a bagel, like the big circle and the little circle on the inside. And the little circle is like the things that like you will not compromise on. Like this is like the goal for me. This is where I can't budge. And then in the outer circle, write all of the ways you can compromise. An example that they gave me, they were working with a couple who were retiring. The wife wanted to retire to a family farm in Iowa. Like she had this farm and like, we're going to stay there. We're going to tend the land. And her husband was like, no, I want to sail around the world. And so those two things sound so different. Like you can't do both of those things. So somehow they came to a compromise. So both of those were in their like little circles, but the other like negotiable aspects were like when we do this, how long we do this, how much time we spend doing this. Those things were all negotiable. So they were able to compromise on like, okay, we will sail around the world for a year and then we'll spend a year on the farm and then we'll figure out what to do next. So they agreed on the duration for where they were going to be, the money they were going to spend. Again, like the timing, like it didn't matter if we had done the year sailing, like, I don't know, 5 years from now or the farm first. So they all like, they worked through all of those things. And I asked if they had any follow up from this couple, like what they ended up doing at the end of the 2 years. And they did not know. So I'm hoping they will let me know. But yeah, those things seem so different. Like, and even the compromise they came up with sounds like almost so simple. Like, oh yeah, we'll do this thing first and then we'll do that thing. And sometimes it is the simplest solution. And then you make a decision at the end of it. Because like maybe the husband actually realized once he started sailing, like, oh, I do hate this. And so maybe the farm is the way to go. But you'll never know until you try both of them.
I remember reading that part in the article and like whenever you first laid out the situation, I was like, this is not going to play out well. And then you kind of hit us with the punchline on like how they ended up compromising. And to your point, I was like, wow, that was actually a really simple compromise.
Yeah.
Like he wanted to do this, she wanted to do that. So let's pick which one we want to do first. And then we'll do the next one. And then, we'll decide after we've done both of those, what life has got to look like after that. And life is so long too that like sometimes it is easy to compromise on things like timing or duration because of that, like where you feel like you're at such a stronghold and there's such a collision. Maybe it's simply just trying out what the other person wants to do for a little while and then asking if they would do the same and reciprocate for you and do the same for you. And I'm like, yeah, that seems pretty obvious.
Yeah. And like no one has to like quote unquote lose because like both people's preferences were being catered to. Like we're doing both of the things that we want to do. And so we can make like a more clear decision about how we want to spend the rest of our lives. So it's not like the wife won because we're going to the farm forever or the husband won because we're going sailing forever. There was a happy medium. Everyone got what they wanted.
Yeah, I remember this example that somebody gave me too around the birthday dinner example that you were sharing there. And it could have been one of those, you do the bagel exercise and on one person's bagel, whoever's birthday it is, in the middle, it's, I want to be able to see you on my birthday. And on the other person's bagel, it's, I don't want to spend more than $50. And maybe they're going to an expensive restaurant and then they're going to get drinks afterwards. So whenever they sat down, did the bagel exercise, kind of looked at each, they found a creative compromise where, okay, hey, I'm going to skip dinner, but I'm going to meet you for drinks afterwards. And it's like, now I can stay within budget. And the other person wins because they get to see you on their birthday. And you kind of hit both needs from both parties. And it could even be better than expected. Because like maybe you bring in a fresh set of energy into the birthday adventure that day and you meet up for drinks and the party gets a little bit bigger and things get exciting. So I do think if you step back and look at the situation and figure out what's important to each person, there is tons of creativity to be able to find a situation or a solution that works for each of you.
And that goes back to like, what is the dream within the conflict here? Like, what is it that you actually want? Like, oh yeah, to see my friend on my birthday. And then maybe you realize like, oh, the restaurant I want to go to, like that's actually negotiable. Like that's not the non-negotiable part. And so then you might realize like, okay, like maybe I switch it to a more budget-friendly restaurant and like they get to come to dinner and then maybe they choose not to buy a drink when we do the drinks and then they get to come to everything. It's like you just realize like what is actually important to you and what isn't important to you. Because like, yeah, we get stuck in that like if it's not this exact way, like it's not perfect. And then if we just like stop to think about like, no, everything will be fine. Like what is the thing that's actually important here? And make that part perfect.
What happens when emotions boil, things just inherently get ugly, and like we just are at a place where we each need to handle our own emotions? What advice do you give in that situation?
Yeah, the Gottmans talk a lot about this like concept of flooding, where like your heart rate rises, your muscles tense, and like you're going into fight, flight, or freeze mode. So like arguments are emotional. Like there's no way around it. You can't be a robot and like untangle your feelings from it. And so sometimes like we get into that place of like, okay, this is how my body is physically reacting to this. And so that's when we should step away. And like you need to be explicit about it. Like we should take a break. How about we come back in 15 minutes? Like I just need some air, some water. And like again, that doesn't need to be a contentious thing. And like hopefully the other party will be receptive to that. And sometimes like you need to not be as invested, which again is easier said than done. But like I loved this tip, especially for workplace conflicts, but I think it could work for other relationships. But to like think of yourself as a consultant, like you can give all the recommendations you want, but like ultimately it's somebody else's call. And so I've been trying to do that a little bit. Like one of my bosses has this amazing saying that I repeat to myself all the time: care less. And that doesn't mean like you don't care about things. It's just like realizing where you're putting your energy. Like if I see a post on Facebook and I'm just like, this is so dumb, and like I feel myself getting worked up over it, I'm just like, care less. Like this doesn't impact my life. This doesn't matter at all. Like just care a little bit less. It helps you like detach some of that emotion from things, and it can maybe like stop you from leaving a terrible comment on like a stranger's Facebook post.
That's funny. In some conversations you go in and you know that this might be heated, this might be awkward. Like you kind of can anticipate that there's an emotion that's probably going to come out of that conversation. You shared this advice around front loading the conversation. Do you mind kind of sharing that and how we can use that and maybe even a script for how to start the conversation?
Yeah, like it's totally normal to like feel nervous, scared before talking to another person. Like it's normal. My partner is a freelancer, and so he's often dealing with clients, and he's always like very nervous to like counter their price maybe, or to like tell them, okay, with the scheduling, like this is what the delivery date is going to look like. And oftentimes the other person is always very receptive, but I think it endears you to somebody if you are just like open about it up front, like especially with our friends. Like if you say something like, I really want to talk to you about something, but I don't want things to be weird between us. Or like, I'm like kind of nervous how you might think about this. I don't want this to be awkward. Like it gives the other person a little bit of time to prepare and lets them know how you're feeling. And so then they can like work to not make you feel awkward or not make this like feel terrible for you. Again, if they're a good friend, like they're going to want to do everything in their power to make this not an awkward situation. So by just like getting it out there, you're sort of like, okay, this is why like I'm stumbling over my words, or like, yeah, this is a hard conversation to have, but just like be open with your nervousness.
You're right. It's so endearing too when somebody knows that right away. I had a friend use this on me. I don't think even intentionally, but he just came to me. He's like, man, I'm actually like so embarrassed to share this, and then I was just like, it was something that was a little embarrassing, but I was just like, that's funny that A, you shared it, and B, that like you already knew that you were embarrassed about it, but you still trusted me enough to come and share that, not only that embarrassing moment, but the fact that you were embarrassed about it too. And then we laughed and giggled about it. And then it was past us versus like holding that in and eventually coming out in a different situation that could be much, much more different.
Yeah, if you're just like, this is so stupid, but blah, 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 blah. And then oftentimes the person is like, no, that's not stupid at all. Like, I felt the same way.
Yeah. They will almost immediately reaffirm to you, like, hey, I feel like this is really petty, but I feel like I've been paying for a lot of the toiletries lately. Do you feel that way? And is there a way that maybe you can chip in for some of the toiletries or pick up some of the toiletries? Like, that's like a very hard thing to share with a roommate. But the other way to go about it is to be resentful about this and continue to pay for toiletries for the next year. And then, you're out at dinner and they want to split the bill with you. And then all of a sudden you blow up on them and you're like, you never pay for anything. I pay for all the toilet paper. I pay for all the soap. And they're like, whoa, like what happened? A, I didn't realize you were feeling that way. But B, why didn't you just share that with me then?
Yeah, and I've been that roommate where like it just came to a point where I just had to text it because like I knew my delivery was going to be like massy if I didn't. But yeah, like I was like, yep, I've been buying all the toilet paper for the last year. Like, would you guys mind picking it up? And like, again, it's fun. They're like, oh yeah, sure. Like I didn't even notice you were doing that. And like, it always has like a fine solution. But then I was like, why didn't I do this sooner? Like, because I was afraid of how they would react. And then I just got resentful.
Having roommates is like the ultimate test on communication. Like if you want to get better at communication, have some roommates and figure a bunch of situations out, because I feel like they're always some of the hardest and stickiest ones to deal with.
Yeah, especially because like if these are just random people, this isn't someone you necessarily know or like. And that makes it even harder because you're like, I have no reason to like keep a relationship with this person. But like just for humanity's sake, like we should be nice to people.
Yes.
So
let's finalize this conversation by talking about what happens when you just don't see eye to eye. Like maybe you just agree to disagree, or maybe like you just don't like how the other person is approaching this disagreement. Like you're trying to handle your emotions, you're trying to make them feel heard, but they're doing all the opposite things. They're kind of going through that list of mistakes that we started this conversation with. They're dismissing you, they're interrupting you, they're playing the victim. How do you go about a situation like that? Is there a polite way to end a disagreement and walk away from a situation?
yeah, like you can give them maybe like one more chance. Like you might say something like, can we slow this down? I really want a chance to finish what I'm saying before I hear your response. Like if they're constantly interrupting you, or like if you feel like they're using some like nasty words, you might say something like, I really want to understand you. Could you say it another way? To maybe get them to use more like concrete language instead of just like insulting you. And like maybe they're just lying and like you know that they're lying. I feel like this is a really good tip that an expert gave me. Like don't try to respond to like every single lie that they said, because then you're just like rattling off a list of things and you're not actually like getting your point of view across. Pick like a umbrella lie that like demonstrates how all of their other arguments or are untrue. So like pick like one lie to sort of call them out on. Don't try to go tit for tat with them, because that's never going to work, because then you're just going to like escalate into a screaming argument. And if things are really not going well, you might say something like, I think we're disagreeing in a way that's not going to help us understand each other or reach a good outcome. Let's come back to this later. Or you might just like end it there. Like, I think we're disagreeing in a way that's like not helpful to us. And then like just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide if you want to continue that relationship, or maybe this is the situation where you recognize that that friendship or that relationship doesn't mean as much to you as you thought it did. And their true colors came out in the handling of this situation. So agreeing to disagree and then starting to end a relationship is, although not ideal, not something that should be off the table too. Like you don't need to fix everything in a situation like that, but you want to end a relationship and you want to show up in a relationship that makes you proud. So do what you can on your side. But once again, you can only control half of that conversation.
Right, exactly. Yeah, a bit of advice one of the experts gave me is like, if you feel like their values are like minimizing your experience, make you feel unsafe, and they're not willing to change that or look past that, like that might not be a healthy relationship. But ultimately, like you need to decide, like, is that person's value interfering with our relationship, or is it something like we can just choose not to talk about and move on? But that like kind of just comes down to you, and that could be its own like separate interview.
Allie, as we close in at the end of this conversation, I'll have one more final question for you, but I want to know, where can people connect with you? What's a good place to consume more of what you got going on?
Yes, you can consume everything that I've got going on at Vox.com. I'm a senior reporter there. Or you could follow me on X at Allie Volpe with 2 E's in Allie, ALLIEE, and the same on Instagram.
Yeah, and at Vox, you cover relationships, wellness, money, home, life, work, all the things in that regard. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye on some of the work. And you got also something else pretty fun in the works that we won't talk about now, but maybe you can come back on the show and share a little bit more about it whenever it's out and into the world. But my final question for you, Allie, if you had the opportunity to teach a 16-week class to a group of graduating college seniors on a topic that isn't normally covered in the classroom, what would you teach and how would you teach it?
Yes, I would teach a course on friendship to help change people's perspective of it. I think people have sort of fallen into this way of thinking that like friendship should be easy. And if there's any sort of conflict, if it's hard at all, like then therefore it's a bad relationship. And I just would want to challenge people's thinking on that of like, well, you wouldn't think just because you had a fight with your romantic partner that it's a bad relationship. So we should be thinking about our friendships in the same way, that it is going to be work, but it's meaningful work, that we need to challenge our assumptions about friendship. And that even if we're feeling like we are exhausted, we're burnt out, we can't see people, that the thing to do is to get off the couch and go engage with people, because that is what really fills us up.
Very well said. And in a very, very important class, I still don't understand why that is not a college course that's out there right now.
Oh, I know. Let's get it on the curriculum, people.
Once again, this is Allie Volpe, senior reporter at Vox. You can go and check out all her work at Vox.com. Allie, this has been an awesome conversation. Thanks for sharing so much time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the episode. As always, I appreciate your kind words. If you want to leave us a rating and review on your podcast player right now, that would absolutely make my day. If you want to find episode show notes, our blog, and other great resources, head over to tsirpodcast.com. If you have follow-up questions, an idea for a future episode, or just want to say hi, we have a contact form on our website, and those messages go straight into my inbox, and I promise you, I will reply. But all right, guys, I really appreciate you tuning in. I love you all, and you're not alone. Let's keep making it through our struggles together.